I can keep going, interrupt her. Sorry, Lily.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. First, I want to apologize that I have not used basic question from beginning to the end. Actually, I don't really know how the whole thing works, which is a disadvantage for me to give you input, but in a from a different angle, it could be advantage that I can ask questions that as you answer my questions, it may help you to think things differently. So that's my hope. I don't know if it's true or not. So from this past view, I'm going to take a step back. I'm not focusing what you're talking about at the moment. I'm going to take a step back and look at the whole thing from my point of view, with more of an observer of the system that you're using, you're improving, that I have not personally used. So from my point of view, I would like, my impression is that we have this system that people have been using it, but now we want to make it more available to people even beyond this assembly line, right? Anyone who is using Docker symbol could potentially use this system. So
I'm not sure this particular. Well, I guess if you use basic questions, right?
So is this point valid or not?
I think that there are a couple of layers of us trying to think about how to categorize and group the stuff to make it easy to use. The first one is, it's in 2 interviews. Can we get it in 30 that have some value to having multiple people sign? But then I think totally right. Like, we're thinking ahead. What are the easy things we can do now to make it generalizable, where it's not tied to basic questions, potentially? What would make it a general purpose thing? But I think that's a second goal. It's like, let's do the things that are easy to do to help advance that. But our key is making it accessible to the other interviews that don't use it yet.
Okay.
I believe
since we do have a bigger scope than just try to, I mean, when I first joined assembly line, my impression is that you guys are trying to get a big group of forms out there for people to use. So that was the present task, right?
Yeah.
So that phase now is kind of slowed down, and now we're moving on into the second phase, which is to improve the tools that we have been using, make it, first of all, of course, to make it more efficient for people who are using, who are about to use, and also for the long term, we're going to make it more accessible for people outside of this whole current group.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if that's the vision, then I'm thinking, would it help as first step to have some kind of graph to lay out the architecture of our imagination? What do you want as the first step or first layer of things, of tools? And I'm not familiar with how to do it, but I just feel intuitively, I just feel that if we could have some kind of graph on a page where we know, okay, this is the top thing, this is the next layer thing, this is the next layer thing. So we would know, for example, if we say, okay, we have a basic question file, and then we'll have a bunch of special cases files. So that's one layer of things. And then next part is how do you imagine people use it? for example, right now, people are copying the basic question file into their interview, but would it be possible advantages to have them just call the file instead of copying it, just include the file? You know, this kind of thinking. So we just first have this overall structural discussion to have this kind of graph somehow developed, and then we can dive into details and say, okay, which one is more basic, more pressing, that then we can focus first, and we go that way. So then we kind of like draw a map for ourselves. Then as we go each step, we know where we are going, and we can change. Of course, we can change, but at least we have an overall plan. So basically, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, so you were thinking we both need a map of how things work, which is more a developer
for basic questions.
And no, because I think there's lots of things that overlap, right? It's not specifically just that one file, but all the things that you get to run our system, I think. And then, but you're also saying, Lily, if I understand right, we should have a roadmap for what we're trying to improve about the system overall, like where we want to go over time.
Right.
Those both do seem like good ideas. Yeah, I guess I see right now we have a list of things we wanted to talk about, which I was thinking of as a roadmap, but I think we could be more concrete about it. Like it might be an overarching theme that groups them and helps us make more of our decisions. I think those are both good ideas.
Right, but then how about like real graph? You know, like squares, triangles, lines, that kind of graph.
Mm-hmm. So are you thinking like, let me see, I think I have one that might be like what you're talking about.
You know, it's like in the old days, you have a star, you get a diamond, and you go a line, you go yes and no.
Are any of us familiar with
diagram?
Yeah, are any of us familiar with how like not just do we know that they exist, are any of us like familiar or experienced in making those kinds of graphs?
In making flowcharts, yeah.
Like I'm not experienced in making a code architecture flowchart, right?
Me neither, but I think at least if we can have some kind of primitive, even just like a hand drawing thing that illustrates.
I can use a digital tool or a hand drawing thing, right? My problem is that I don't know how to put one together in a way that would tell people usefully what it means. Like I'm not sure that a graph that I would draw right now would be useful.
Help us.
I know. I mean like you or me, right? That's what I mean by people. Like I don't know what I would draw on a piece of paper or in a program that would be useful. Like I don't know how to draw a useful graph. So
all right,
that's kind of my first.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. Right. I mean, we don't have to do it now. I mean, I can spend some time if I can understand what we're doing. I can try to create a file, a graph like this.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea, and we can just, if we use a tool that's really dynamic and editable by the group, and I'm not sure, there's tons of diagramming tools. I bet there's one that helps you organize concepts in a way that you can share. That might be helpful. We could be a living thing that we just refer to and say, hey, we can tweak this, make this clearer.
Yeah,
I don't think we have to be.
I know that Plectica is collaborative, though I don't know if it like it's limited into how much you can do before you have to pay.
No, I don't think we needed to really use it extensively. We just use it for me. I think if we have like a one-page diagram, it would like immediately give us this, at least like remind us, okay, this is the whole picture, where we are now at this point, that kind of thing.
I like that idea, Lily. I think, yeah, I'd be, and you said you're willing to give it a start. So I would say like the only thing I would recommend is to choose a tool that we can edit collaboratively. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think you could, once we have something to look at, we could all give feedback. So I wouldn't feel too stymied by like, oh, I don't know how everything works yet or where it all fits together. Because I think that could be a way to help clarify things for you too. And we could help answer it. Once we can see it as a visual, we'll know what's the piece of information that you need to fill in. So I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so that's one. Then what about like basic question? Copy the file into each individual interview versus just include it. I mean, do people actually now, after they copy it to it?
So they don't copy. They don't copy everything. They do include. They just copy the things that they have to customize.
I think we came up with a good solution for that too, which we're going to start by implementing. There's some limits to it, which I don't like, but I think it's okay. We're going to start by implementing this for questions about people. So their names, their addresses, and other common fields. We're going to have a better way for people to interact with customizing those.
Yeah, I think it's because you're discussing the details of how people interact. That made me think, okay, so for example, the reason I'm asking that is because if we only ask people to include, then the file is in our hand. Then when we change it or improve it or do whatever, we don't have to worry about break other people's things because we first of all, we can have a version control. And for newer ones, we can give them a newer version of the basic question, for example, file, that kind of thing. And secondly, then we can use standard field names. Now, let's look at, I mean, for me, the way I look at it is that, okay, the ultimate goal is to produce a form, right? The form has fields on it. Those fields need to be filled through questions. But if we have the questions which have the fields, which let's just as an example, the fields are and the names are standardized. The field names are in the form are standardized. So they are kind of somehow matched already. So we can give people freedom to change the label of the fields so that they can show the user. We can give them the freedom.
So before we go too far down this road, I do want to say that unless I've misunderstood kind of your description of what you're trying to describe, I think that is what we have been doing. So what we have created is standardized fields, and people can interact with them by using those variables. They can't currently customize the field names, but that's part of the customization we're working on. But people don't just copy and paste the code currently, unless I'm mistaken. Not unless I'm mistaken. I know that people only copy paste when they have to because we don't have a good way to customize, like you said, right? Like customizing those label names. We don't have that yet. And that's where the copying and pasting is a problem right now, just so that we're all on the same page. We do have fields and standardized fields, and the hope has been that we can make it customizable enough without making it too complex so that people can use the things that we provide and also get what they need out of them. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page of what we have versus kind of what we need. Did that clarify it a bit?
I think we are on the same page. We're on the same page. What I was trying to describe is that I'm just describing the picture as I see it, how ideally it's going to, in the end, it's going to end up with. But as for what we already have, I'm sure I've seen enough communication where you are teaching people how to use standardized field names. So I know that then it's
Okay,
probably in
got
a
it.
very good shape already. So I'm just describing the picture as
Final state,
the
got
way
it.
I see it.
So,
So for example, when you allow people customize the label and customize the which question to call, which question to ignore, or I don't know if it's possible or even necessary to switch the order of those questions. So that's something for discussion. But basically, my thinking is that if we only need them to include the file instead of copying the file, so we somehow.
But they don't copy the file, right? They include the file. That is how it currently works.
Lily, so the way that copying works right now, which I think you asked a question about this, and we probably just didn't give a good explanation before.
Okay.
If you want to, let's talk about a specific example. You ask for somebody's name. In your interview, you want to give like some more context around the person's name that you're asking about. So you would you would copy the question from basic questions. You would change the text in any way that you wanted, but you'd leave the names of the fields that it's setting alone. So, but if you just wanted to use the standard way we ask for that information, you wouldn't have to copy it at all.
And I think part of the picture is that I think we have not communicated clearly. You don't copy the whole basic questions file. You just find the basic questions file. You find the question that you want to be different than the other questions, and then you copy that and adjust the labels and the text in it while keeping the variables the same. But you don't copy the whole basic questions file. That's accessible on the server, and that people, you use every time.
Okay.
Does that clarify a bit about what's going on?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I always thought that when you say copy basic question, I thought they copied the whole file there.
Oh yeah, no,
Okay.
you have to copy the whole file.
Okay.
Okay, I'm glad we find, because I knew something was off. Okay, cool. Okay, got it.
Thank you. All right, sorry. Okay, so
If we could zoom back in a little bit though, so like what I was hoping to do is, so Mich, I think we have a plan for regular kinds of questions, but the code Michelle wrote for helping get user signatures is a much bigger feature than just like one question where you're filling in a field. There's a complex interaction that involves background tasks and multiple interview files. So I think it's really informative for us to consider how we allow customizing questions or what we intend to move them to. But I think it's not enough to say we're going to use that approach to customize the way that you control the interview signature, because that is, I think basically my hope is that we can figure out, well, what's the right way to encapsulate it, the way people interact with it, so that we can minimize the copying and pasting there. But I think it might be a little different from how we minimize copying and pasting to customize a basic kind of question about just filling in a field on the form. So I think it's a separate thing, but I think it definitely informs it. And where we had left off, like right now, there are a number of different techniques that Michelle was looking into. And what I was hoping is, can we see the whole interface and then decide like, how do we harmonize those so it fits as like one cohesive thing you're interacting with. And we don't necessarily have great examples yet. We have something we're moving to for things like name fields and address fields. And this might be a good place because it's a discrete feature for us to try to achieve that simpler interface. I think it's really hard to do that before you've written code. And like you, Michelle, like you explored a bunch of different ways to achieve your goal, right? Like,
and there's still more ways to explore, yeah.
Yeah. So it would have been impossible to know upfront, like what's the right architecture for this. But now that you have working code that does what you want, now I think we can consider how to group and organize and categorize it. It might involve renaming some things. It might involve having a different abstraction layer between it. Like I said, potentially it could be a class or a function. or it could just be variables, but maybe we've said, okay, for configuration variables, we're moving those into a dictionary. That was one choice we made. So, that might be a really simple organization technique that we would consider using. It's just like, okay, it's a bunch of variables you configure, but they're all in one place in a dictionary.
I want to say real quick, I still think if Lily, if you want to approach kind of mapping our, I'm not sure if you still feel you want to, or that it would be useful to map kind of how our code interacts with itself and outside and do that diagram. But I think I'd be interested in seeing what that looks like. And I appreciate you bringing it up, right? And then, and I do think we can try to like have a more overall view of what I wasn't completely sure. So if we do an example of it, I think that will clarify it for me. But I just wanted to support you with that, to my moral support. And the other thing is that, as I said, I don't know how one maps these variables.
Yeah.
And so if we can, as it applies to this situation, if we can figure out how one does that, that would be great. And I could do that with this code.
So do you mean literally a visual map, or is a table like this, if it made sense? I don't know if this does make
Whatever
sense.
makes sense, but there's more variables than like,
No, yeah.
like there's a lot of variables. So
that's part of what we want to see, right? Is like, how do they fit together? What's the way? And that might change which variables you have.
right, but how do you want me to represent them? Do you just want me to list them?
I think a list would actually be really helpful. A list would be really helpful. And then let's think about how we can categorize and structure and group them so that there's more than just a list. But I think the samples aren't as helpful. Although maybe if we can lead to small examples later, that would end up being helpful. But I think a first top level overview is, okay, we want someone to use this feature. What variables do they touch potentially to do stuff? What are things we expect them to touch? What are things that are less likely for them to touch, but they could if they wanted to change this part of the behavior? How do they interact with it? And then when we get to the how do they interact with it part, which I think is the third level, that's where a sample might tell a lot more than a written narrative description. But we want to get a big picture overview of like, how many variables are there to configure? How do you change them? And I'm assuming most of the time it's just to set this variable to this value, and then we don't really need an example. But if it's something more complex, then we'd want to see maybe a signature, function signature.
I don't know what you mean by set this variable to this value, but I will give it a shot. I mean,
So,
there are questions, there are things that are supposed to help gather. There are, you know what I mean?
maybe it is easier for you to start out with the narrative, which is, let's tell the story of a developer who wants to implement this. Like, what do they do? Start from the beginning. Like, they include this, they include some text.
So here is up here. That is that without customization, right?
Well, it makes sense to you because you wrote the code, but to me,
I can tell you, but this
that
is
wouldn't
the
be so
visual
helpful.
representation of it.
To just say it out loud now wouldn't be as helpful as having something written down we could look at as a whole.
What I'm hoping is that this can help me understand what you would want written down, what would be helpful to write down.
Okay, that sounds like a good task then. So, all right. So can I just maybe I should write out what I am thinking would be a narrative description of it. I don't know if that's the best way to capture it ultimately. Okay, and I get this capitalizing things for you. You don't intend to. All right. So.
Yes, definitely not.
How about look at an actual interview and try to abstract it, develop backwards instead of this way. We do it the other way. Would that help?
Well, I don't know. We were first trying, and I feel like we spent a lot of time in meetings where it was a lot of jumping around that didn't end up making sense to me. So I think it would help if you were trying to implement it, but I'm hoping to just have like a bigger, higher level overview before we get into that. Because to me, there's a lot of code to digest, and I didn't find it easy to know like what's going on in the different parts to be able to do that. And I think once we've done that, we might not need this chart, but I'm hoping it's possible to get to it. And it might actually even be a helpful clarifying thing, Michelle, for you to identify places where like, I have an idea for this is something where I'm having problems and maybe it could be abstracted differently or organized differently. And we could focus in on those areas that you identify as being challenges. Because you can't possibly do this before you start coding. I think, at least for me, I find that really hard to lay out an architecture before I've written any code. There's some experimenting with like low fidelity approaches to it, and then I can move from there to figuring out how to architect it. But I think now you're at the point where you have working code. You should be able to describe the architecture of it. And that's what I think we're looking for.
Sure.
And then we can give feedback on the architecture and say what things should be changed. If anything, maybe there's nothing, and maybe it's just you go through the same. I just think, even though you were planning ahead for for people to use it, there are things that you did that worked that you didn't change, that maybe you would have now that you finished the whole thing. But maybe I'm wrong. But to me, I don't know how to I don't quite understand what all the different things are doing or how yet. And I'd appreciate just a look that gives me a high level overview of what it is.
Sure. So go ahead and write the example. And
all right. So, this is like basically thinking through scenarios, right? Like, just like we're talking about scenario-based testing. I want to implement the multi-signature flow for a motion to dismiss. Let's stick with something like that. That's what we've been doing it for so far.
Well, you said the notice for, never mind, motion to dismiss, that's fine.
Just an example. This is like a motion to dismiss. Okay, so first,
Now, do these people have to sign in or not? Logging or not logging?
No, not logging in.
like I'm gonna say like first, like, so I include two files in the top command. I set the variable X to value Y, right? Or what do I do? So let's start like this. In my interview order block, I do what do you do? Maybe that's the wrong way to say it. What do you need to do? Gorilla glue? I don't think. Tacky glue?
That could work. I'm trying to glue a plastic spider paper and it's not working with regular glue.
Oh, this will work for that.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Thanks.
Tacky. I think you like dry and then I don't know. It has instructions on it, I'm sure.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, and then we might want to go to these details, Michelle, but we might not, depending on how big this outline gets, because I think the point is to have a high-level view of it. So if it's too detailed, it might be overwhelming. But
Okay.
I'm not saying
I mean,
take it
do
out
you
yet.
want the,
Keep it in
okay.
for now. And I'm saying we might not need to do that for every point. So what are the things you have to do? Okay, that makes sense. First, make sure you trigger the contact details of the user. I think get is a little misleading, but
you want to trigger contact details? What was the wording you preferred?
maybe can I write? And I don't think it's
Sure.
helpful for you to write if it's trying to be my narrative.
Okay.
I can prompt. You can prompt me with the with the overview of what it is we're
Oh,
trying
I
to
thought you
describe,
wanted me to write.
and
Okay,
then I
yeah,
will.
that's fine.
Well,
That
I-
sounds more useful. Yeah, I like
yeah,
it.
I think it will be, at least it will be a start us on the path. Maybe we'll finish it now, but I don't know if we will. But then I think we can fill in the details. So make sure, because I think get, I don't know what that means, but maybe when I write it, you don't know what I mean. So I'm not sure. But anyway, we need to, I would call it what we're doing an interview order block, triggering. Trigger the user's contact information. And I'm assuming we also trigger the contact information for all co-signers, right?
No, so you want to trigger the, first you want to trigger the way, I mean, yes, you're triggering the contact information for the co-signers, but you're triggering the method that they will sign is more important there.
So
You are triggering,
when you say
you are gathering how the other signer will sign the document. For example, will they sign it? Will they use a link? Will they sign on the piece of paper, etc.?
we need to gather the preferred contact.
The preferred signature
method,
method.
Method means
the preferred signature method, not contact method.
And options are person, proxy, which I think means user signs for person. I'm going to write that down.
So first one is the user. I mean, if you mean in person, then like they will use the user's device. It's not right. They can be there in person. I don't know if that means the same thing legally. I don't know what that
That's what I meant, but I think it's a good thing to clarify because I don't think it was clear. It's ambiguous with the user.
They will get a link on their phone. They will get a link on their in their email. Or you can just say they will get a link to sign the document. I don't think it's necessary to specify which, but that's fine.
These are all options that are configurable, right?
No.
Okay, we'll move on. We'll move on to the next thing. So first you ask for how they want to sign.
And physically sign, right, on the physical piece of paper.
Okay. I'm going to really just say like, don't get the signature at all. Those are functionally equivalent, right? Maybe it's worth separating them because if we're talking about how you show a list of options.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's only one of them. They're not separate, right?
I don't know what that means, but I don't think we have to dive into it.
I mean, there are not six.
I don't think we have to dive
options.
into it. It's okay.
Okay.
So what else do you, maybe this overview is everything's gonna be underneath here. I'm not sure, but let's see. I think this is right. Trigger and gather is what we do in the interview order block. Okay. And then what happens next? You trigger the signature gathering, right? And to do that, what do we do?
You trigger the calculation of signature types before triggering the signature gathering. It doesn't have they don't have to.
Those are separate. So you're saying
well, they're not. I'm trying to think about this and how to describe them as separate because I don't think it's quite that clear. If you trigger, so I will tell you how it happens in the code and then you can describe it in whatever words you want.
Okay.
You trigger calculating which people are what kind of signer. Then you trigger gathering the signatures, which will use that information to ask for signatures in the correct way, right, for each of the signers.
So this is a step that the interview author needs to take. They need to say, okay, get the signature methods, then now collate them basically and group them.
And there's another step before that, which is, yeah, I could actually move that. That didn't occur to me, but I can. I can abstract that, which is a good point. You have to define who all the signers are at some point. Once you have to define who, like, you have to say all signers equal users plus witnesses plus other signers plus whatever, right? Like you have to define who is all other signers. I mean, who is all signers altogether.
Okay, so all right, so first we identify the people who will sign the form.
So then that
yeah.
Before you
includes
gather
the
the preferred
signer type and the number of signers, right?
So this is by creating a list, I'm
you don't
assuming?
need the number of signers. So you just, yeah, sure, you create a list. I just use plus, but it's not before you gather the signers. It's not a part of gathering the signers. So you have to say, because you can gather the signers in their own groups. You could gather witnesses, and then you could gather co-defendants, and you could gather all those people separately. So you don't identify the gathering of their contact information also gathers. So if you want to gather co-defendants, right? You gather co-defendants and it asks you, do you have co-defendants? Do you have another co-defendant? And you gather the method that they sign, and you gather all that information about co-defendants. Then if there are witnesses, you ask, are there any witnesses? Is there another witness?
Michelle, so that doesn't sound like it has to do with the signature flow, what you're describing now. What's
does,
the part that does have to do with the signature?
Right. Hang on. I'm getting to there. So then you have to define who are all your signers, so that all of the signers in total. So you have to say all signers is witnesses and co-signers and co-defendants, so that the code will then know how to ask for the signatures, and then you can gather the signatures.
Can you explain what you mean they'll know how to ask signatures? Are you saying that they get identified as you're the witness, sign this as a witness?
For example, if you have co-defendants and witnesses, I don't know actual legal stuff. So supposing you have co-defendants and witnesses, then you would have a block that says all signers equals users plus co-defendants plus witnesses. And then the signature gathering will automatically work, because it will go through all of those people and ask for them in an appropriate way.
But it does not matter which group they come from.
No, it just matters that you aggregate the groups together.
You have a full list of all the people who will sign. So what is that called? Does that have a name? Is there a variable?
All signers. Okay. It has to be a variable name.
So it could be anything. It doesn't have to necessarily.
No, it has to be all signers.
But the contents can be anything.
The contents can be anything. Any list of people that have that information gathered about them, right?
So in our form, it would only be users. This scenario that I just laid out, but yes, okay.
I mean, in the moratorium, it's users and co-defendants. They are a separate variable from each other.
Okay, that's the way that it was organized there. I'm not sure if that's the way you would always do it, but it could be a good way to do it. Depends on other ways you're using the users variable in the interview.
So it might be like aggregate who all the signers are.
All right, so I think we have this. We define a list named all signers.
So that is after the gathering.
Why would that be after you gather the preferred? It couldn't be. You need to define all signers before you know how all signers are going to sign, don't you?
So if you put all signers in a list and then you say, is there another signer? But you have witnesses and defendants, you can't ask the user a useful question about those signers. Or at least the way it was explained to me, you want to ask who are your co-defendants? And then you want to ask, who are your witnesses? You're not just saying, who is everyone that is signing the form? So
I don't think what you're
we should
describing
run
has
this, we
anything to
should,
do with this part, Michelle. So
it,
you're
it
saying
does
you need
have
to
to do
know.
with it. It
I don't
does
think,
have to do with it.
can I just explain the way that I'm understanding it? You're saying you need to know who's going to sign, but first you want to know what category they fall in so you can ask for it usefully. But that doesn't have to do with the
That's
part we're
not-
trying to describe here, which is how do you get there? Of course, you need to know, you're not going to say like, you're the signer, tell me about who everyone who's going to sign the form. But we don't care how they get in this list. They just need to be in this list.
I'm just saying, okay, you gather the groups of signers and then you make sure you've aggregated everyone into one list of signers. After you gather the signers, you make sure they are aggregated into a list of signers.
Okay, so I think we're all on the same page there. All right. So for all signers, I think we actually can start getting into specifics. So for all signers, what are we defining for all signers I?
Where are you? Okay.
The all signers I dot what?
Okay, I feel like that's not what I'm describing. So I don't know, like you don't do, okay.
Michelle,
Like there is never
Michelle,
anything that says
Michelle.
all signers I.
I know this is going to be tricky, but can we try going through it in the order that makes sense? Because the whole point is for me to
That
give
makes
a narrative
sense to
example.
you. Sure, that makes
That
sense
is what
to
we're trying to
you.
work towards. Yes,
Yes,
that is
but
the whole point.
okay, yes, but I'm not.
All the code makes sense to you already.
Wait, yes, I know. I'm trying to understand how I can replicate the description you're writing when I'm not understanding the description you're writing. So I can't replicate this currently. And I thought that was part of the purpose.
I'm trying to, by going through this, I'm hoping we can help identify the things that are salient for me and that aren't. And what you just described that you wanted to talk about is not something that's salient to this summary. So hopefully that is, adding it in would make sense to you, but is not the information we want to gather. So that's the kind of clarification that I'm trying to provide you.
Okay, it's not clear to me, so that's what I'm saying, but we can keep going and I hope it will become clear at some point. So all signers sign method.
Okay. All right. So when you say collate the signature methods, I think that was what
I said aggregate the signers, but
that's
aggregate
what
the
we've done
sign
in E
methods.
here, right?
No, that's not where it happens, but okay. Like that's why I'm saying it doesn't fit there in my mind.
I don't want to dive back into that again. I don't think it's going to be a good use of our time. Aggregating means creating a list named all signers, right? Or does it mean something completely different?
And that happens just before you collate the signature methods.
Which is B, right here, where I am.
You said that's D, collate the signature methods.
You misheard me. What does collate the signature methods mean to you? That was my phrasing, it wasn't yours. But you said there's something that you do to say, oh, I know what this means, okay. Break the list of all signers into some kind of sub list, I'm guessing, for each method of signing. I think that's really important to write down, but that's basically what you mean by this, right? That's the step that happens after you've gathered the signature method.
Yeah, it's a good way of describing it.
And do those have their own variable names?
Yep.
Okay, so this creates.
But this is not what a lot of this is not stuff that the person who is using the form, using the code needs to do. A lot of this is not even in their hands.
Okay, I thought you said it was something they had to do and that you were like, oh, I don't need to, I could do that for them.
No, it's not something they need to do. It's just a variable that they don't need to call. There's a variable that says collate.
Let's not talk about it if it's not something that they have to change or that they should.
Okay, but they have to make sure to trigger it, to trigger the collating of the signature methods.
So that's what they're doing. All right. What do they do to trigger that?
You just call a variable name. And I can get you that if you would like.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I know that the primes are good for other kinds of format code, but let's just stick with bold. Make them stand out here. I know it's not quite right, but all right. So they have to trigger that. Okay. And then they trigger the signature gathering, and that is by referencing.
By the way, this question, gather the preferred signature methods, that is a question that already exists. All they do is make sure that the variable is triggered for each person. They don't write this question.
Maybe we should rephrase it to trigger. Trigger gathering, because trigger implies they're not writing anything down. All right. Okay, so they trigger collation of the signatures by referencing collect signature types, and then they trigger the actual signature gathering. What variable do they reference to do that?
Right now, let's see. I wrote it down in here, so that's what I keep forgetting. I think it's just user sign-on device. So dot sign-on device for the users. The user 0 dot sign-on device will trigger the whole thing to go off.
I will trigger all of the people being gathered.
Yep, including like links being sent and everything. But if people want to customize it, it is broken up into smaller pieces that a person that is not customizing it doesn't have to look at.
So does this get us to a full simple implementation if they've gone through and they've changed things?
Nope, then they need to take care of this variable. They need to finish up afterwards.
So what is this doing?
So it usually triggers a code block. And I mean, it's a code block and it triggers whatever you want to do after the signatures are gathered.
An example would be, and it's an X because it happens for every
No, it
person.
just an
No,
X
please
to
don't
keep it.
copy that code in there. That doesn't help me right now.
Okay, so I don't know what you want
Can you tell
as an
me
example.
Just
An example
description.
that a code block that calls users status or download or whatever you want, right? Just whatever other things you want to do after you've got all the signatures.
So I see from the X that this is a generic object. Do you trigger this for each person in the list all signers or only for the user 0?
It is for the users 0 in this particular case, but with other signers, it will be not the user. So it is generic so that, I mean, you can make it user 0 if you want, but the code is written to work with any person because it is the same code that works for all signers, all different kinds of signers. Like when you send someone a link, that code is used, right, to get their signature.
So it's from a perspective of somebody when you're referencing this variable. Is it from the perspective of the person who initiated the interview?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a great way to put it.
Not the people signing the form, just to close the loop. Not any,
Well, whoever,
multiple people can sign it. That actually didn't help clarify, did it?
okay, I was like, I don't know how to answer that question.
So I'm going to just say delete that. Actually, that
Okay.
didn't really clarify. It just makes it confusing. Okay, so now we have, and this is, I'm assuming, optional.
What?
Is this variable optional, or does it always need to be defined?
It always needs the after other signers' signatures sought always needs to be defined. Oh, I see. After other signers' signatures sought is actually just for the, well, it's for whoever triggers other signatures being sent, right? So it's not just for any user. Sorry, I got this mixed up with that's what I get for being familiar with code.
Do you mean, what would be an example of another person who would send it out to somebody else?
I don't know. If a cosigner has the ability to send signatures out to somebody else, like if you're like, send this to 3 people so they can sign it too, because this is a pyramid scheme. I don't know, whatever it is you want. Then that would apply to them as well. So
I think that's probably not a relevant example for any of our interviews right now, but yeah.
Right, I'm just saying that if you want to generalize who it's for after other signers' signatures sought is forever for any entity that sends out signatures, right? That gets multiple signatures. Anyone that gets multiple signatures would be using this flow.
I don't think that actually clarifies it in a helpful way for most people who are using it, because it's not a common scenario. But I'm going to just add that note.
Okay. After signature is the one that you want if you're doing some other. Anyway, we can cover that later. Doesn't matter.
Okay, so this is the full steps that one needs to do. And I'm actually, since it is actually relatively concise, I'm going to go ahead and keep these in. I think that is ultimately helpful.
They're also,
well, but I'm going to stick a little bit longer. I just have a meeting at 1. I wanted to do some more independent work, but I think we're close to what are actionable next steps for you.
So this is from the, just to be clear, this is from the, there is also the part that you have to take care of, which I was forgetting earlier, is really a part of the picture. The other signers, right? Because they're the people who are, you have to make the interview for the people who will be signing this. Which there's sensible defaults for that. You can just use the default interview if you want, but
is that a right way to summarize it? We're talking about question blocks here.
let me think about that.
If you're not sure, we can start with just the ones that are question blocks. So this is a question that, what does it do? This is from the signer's perspective, the remote signer.
I mean, you can just use the default file if you want. If we're talking about the least customization necessary, you can just use the default file.
Well, I think we've covered the main behavior and how to trigger it. And now we want to move on to things that you can customize. So I don't think it's bad for us to start with that. And we could have likely to less likely.
Okay, can we just put some kind of divider there that's like, we're talking about customization now?
Sure.
Okay.
The question, so I'm assuming that asks, and I think we need a name for this, the non-user.
So
let's call it.
asks, I mean, questions you can have, customizing their signer interview specifically, because those are going to be different customizations. So you can have a question of whether the person is willing to sign.
What is the other signer? That's a whole different file.
That's, I mean, do we want to talk about customizations for the original document for the user? Or are we talking about like co-signers type thing? Because they have a different file.
Okay, so let me just, let's see. I just have another high level thing to point out. So I will, in your interview, you need to have that other signer file copied in. Is that right?
No.
Okay.
I mean, you can just, if you just use the default, then it will use the default file that already exists on the server.
And
pretty
it's a
generic.
reference to say which interview it's in relation to. That's part of the Redis data that we're storing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, great, that worked.
It started to, and when I needed, they ended up having super glue. So between the two of them, it was just a slow dry. So I had to hold there for a while, but they both worked. Thank you.
Good. Good. All right, so I'm going to create a custom interview file for my interview behavior. I don't know what that's the right way to describe it. Optionally, I can copy in and customize a other signer.
What does, oh, okay. What does copy in mean? Like copy a new file? Because it's a new file, it's not copied into this interview file. Okay. Cool.
I think all right, so I guess in theory, in this other signer interview, you could include the main file at the top and then just override selectively the ones you want to change, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could also just make a file that customizes only particular questions, right? It inherits from other signers.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I just said, yeah.
Okay.
So that actually might be worth describing. So let's see. I will create a YAML file named something like, it doesn't need to match.
Co-defendants.yaml.
I'm just going to stick with other signers since if that's okay.
But other signers is the one that exists already. So if you will override that file completely, and that will not be helpful.
Nope, it's namespace to the package. Wouldn't override it at all.
But yes, but you would use this other signers.yaml instead of the one on the server. I have to, sorry, I'm getting a family call. Sorry.
Quentin, is this a project that Michelle has been working on?
Yeah, it's basically it's DocuSign. It's actually a really complex thing, but yeah. I mean, I think I'm already identifying some things that you might consider changing, but it's really helpful to have gone through this and see what's going on. All right.
So I guess the URL will, the thing is that you will have to pull in othersigners.yaml in your othersigners.yaml, right?
Yep.
Okay. If that can work, that sounds great.
Yeah. I mean, it's namespace to whatever package it's in. It doesn't matter.
I just think it would be, I think it would be less confusing if you just gave it a name that like didn't have to do with that name. That's all.
Yeah, co-defendants doesn't make sense because that is only for that one interview that you worked on. That
But we are
one.
using the, you said we're using the eviction moratorium as the example.
No, I didn't. I said we would do a motion to dismiss.
Okay, a motion to dismiss. So who would it be in a motion to dismiss?
There's no reason it would be a co-defendant. Co-defendant is only if you happen to be a defendant in the case.
No, I understand. I don't need to know the law of it.
Co-party
I'm just
could be it.
saying co-party.
Maybe.
I'm asking what it is in the
To
motion.
me, othersigners.yaml is more helpful in this example. But I think that was a good name. I don't think trying to be more specific would be helpful. Because first of all, this doesn't tell me it's about signing, which is confusing. I like that name, other signers. And I think then if you also if you mirror the same name, I don't think that's confusing. I think it tells me that it's implementing some behavior related to the other file that I know about and can identify. But that's, I think, up to the interview author. I think having this example is clarifying enough. Right. So we're going to say, I'm just going to I should sign off in just a minute or two, but we're going to have a question that's basically ask the person if they want to sign, right? I'm assuming it could show them a preview. It's their actual signature. I'm assuming these are the things that you need, that you might want to customize, right?
I mean, yeah, yeah, I mean, it asks, are you willing to sign? And that has the preview on it in the current thing. So I don't know, but it does give you hooks for some of the flow. So I don't know.
Okay, so let's actually go through the API there a little bit more. So you wouldn't be triggering this. You just have to have defined will define the variable what?
Well, willing to sign, signer dot
Just
willing
called
to
willing
sign.
to sign.
Well, it's
No.
signer dot willing to sign. So it's attached to the person.
Signor or signer? Like that's
I was not a lawyer, so it was an E. But
Okay.
but you did, but it, yeah. But you can say X dot willing to sign or whatever, and that'll work. I mean, anything more specific than X dot willing to sign will work. So anything more specific than an individual will work, and that's why I made it generic so that it could be easily overridden, right?
No, you have to define a specific variable, right? For the behavior of if you're including othersigners.yaml from whatever this package is called, I don't know if we decided where it's going to go yet. I think we did, but it's not there yet. So I just put in signature.
I mean, you could define a question that is X dot willing to sign and just make it the generic object of VC individual, and that would be fine.
So what variable does this existing YAML file look for? What needs to be defined? That's what I'm asking. I know there's lots of ways to define it.
You can use signer dot willing to sign if that's what you want to use.
Is that the variable it's looking for? It's looking for a specific variable.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So that can be a code block that triggers other stuff, but it needs to, that can be at the bottom of a code block, but it needs to return a Boolean value.
And I'm assuming this is signer.signature.
Gets actual signature. This is actually sign on device.
What?
Sign on device. I mean, you don't have to define it, but what you call is sign on device. The next thing that is called is sign on device. So if you first of all, you can define a signer dot after unwilling to sign. If you want, I can just paste it in. You
No.
don't have to.
Please don't.
Yeah.
Then I don't think that'll be helpful here.
But that's a question too that you can define. You
Okay.
said, what can you customize, right? That's a question.
Can we just focus? I know, like, I don't think we need to litigate everything. Let's just focus on, like, I want to figure out right now, we're saying questions that we will define. So what you just
Okay,
mentioned, the
so
variable you mentioned,
sign on
doesn't
device, never
sound
mind,
like
it's
it's
not
a
a
question
question.
block.
Hang on.
It sounds like something you might trigger, but I'm also assuming that that behavior is handled already in the other signer's diagonal. You wouldn't change it. You don't have to trigger it, do you?
No, I mean, no, this will trigger it just fine. So let me,
The part you want to customize is the question text, I'm assuming, right? So that means
so
you're
the
providing.
email templates, you can customize the email templates if you want.
Okay.
You can customize the dot signature question.
So I'm not ever touching sign on device, right?
No, you don't
Okay.
have to.
Signature is what I wanted to customize. That's what I was trying to, these are about things that you're
Sure.
defining. You're providing a way for the variable to be defined, I should say. And okay, so you can customize email templates.
Questions. You can customize dot signature. You can
I'm assuming you rarely would want to do this, right?
customize.
There's so little.
Say that again.
There's so little room on the signature page. I'm assuming you'd rarely want to customize this one, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. Yeah.
But those are the things that you might change. It's really just this one screen, the one that defines willing to sign, that you would be likely to customize out as other than the email templates, right?
Or unwilling to sign, right?
There's a
And the email
separate
templates.
Boolean variable called unwilling to sign.
No, it's just a question. You can have a question block that will show them something if they're not willing to sign.
Okay.
You can customize it if you want.
Okay, no, that's okay. So it would be signer dot unwilling to sign, or is it just called unwilling to sign?
Signer dot unwilling to sign is the variable it's looking for. Let me see. Signer dot after unwilling to sign.
Signer dot after unwilling to sign.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it prefixed with signer?
Because that's the way I built it,
Okay.
and we might not need, well, signer, yeah.
Could be an event.
I
event.
just built it so that it could be like overridden by just being more specific, as opposed to being overwritten by a redefinition of the variable.
And it's an ending of the screen variable, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it can be whatever you want, but that is what it is. You can use it as a jumping off point for other stuff, right? You can use it as an event or whatever.
Just a little,
Difference between willing to sign and after unwilling to sign. I'm confused.
So willing to sign is a Boolean value that is true or false, right? After unwilling to sign is if they say no, right? False, willing to sign is false, then you go to they are unwilling to sign. So you go to what happens after you're unwilling to sign.
I think a tiny recommendation is to make this consistent.
So you're saying it's a direct direction to go after this step. Okay.
What do you mean? Like, can
Don't
you give a variable name?
Don't make it an attribute of signer, because it's interview level. It's not about, there's only one signer who interacts with the session of this file at a time, right? An example would just be,
Okay.
signer unwilling to sign could be, or actor unwilling to sign if you want to keep that, but the signer dot implies
That's fair.
specific to a signer, and
point.
it's not really in this interview context, the CML's context.
Sure, I love it.
Okay. So I think you could write down what are the email templates. Does this give you some more structure for what, I think this was really illuminating already.
Okay.
Hopefully it was helpful for you too. Like one thing you thought of is this doesn't really need to be triggered in the interview order block.
Mhm.
Um,
I'm trying
so
to
we
think if
have-
it does or doesn't. Yeah.
we have like a couple of what I would calling magic variables. We have all signers. We have,
You don't ask for all signers dot sign method. Do you ask for sign method? Nope. You just ask for get signature info, by the way.
sorry?
You don't ask for dot sign method. I don't know if that was clear when we were discussing it.
You don't ask for the way they're signing the form?
You trigger that to be asked, that information to be asked.
Can you clarify what doesn't happen? Because I feel like this is written the way that you just described.
Okay, just a sec. Let me see if I can. So you ask for get signature info because that triggers a flow that asks their name, possibly their court information, and that we'll have to figure out how to customize the information to give to the court about them, that is, and their signature method. All those things are asked when you use get signature info.
And what is get signature info? Is it a top level variable?
I don't know what top level mean. I don't think so. Oh, top level meaning not a thing? No. It's in a loop, right? So one example, I'm gonna paste it in here and you can do what you want with it. Okay.
Helpful. All right, so we're gonna trigger for all signers. I don't think it's helpful to paste it in this list at all, but maybe
No, we don't have to paste it in. Just copy and paste the variable name. That's all. I'm just giving you the variable name without.
Okay.
Okay, and I will get rid of this. Okay.
Okay. We're gonna trigger all signers dot get signature. And I know this is, I'm doing it as an I. It wouldn't work as an I because of intrinsic names, but you're saying doing a loop, which would work, which is a great way to do it.
And that is not what you would. It would not be all signers once again, right? I'm just emphasizing that.
Why would it not be all signers?
Because you ask for different groups of signers individually. Can you tell me a place where I can write this where it would be not frustrating to you? I want to exemplify it. I want to make an example of what this would look like.
I think down here you have lots of code and that's a fine place to put it. But what I try to figure out is what do you need to do to trigger it? You're saying a lot of the time you want to ask for the different ways of users' signatures being gathered in a group that's more narrow than all signers, but that's not a requirement of how you interact with it.
But this, you do not need all signers yet because that's not the flow of the picture. There's specifically.
All right, let's.
I don't know what you want. Let's not entirely.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying like you might go through all the users first and get their signature info, and then you go through the witnesses. So let's focus on what is get signature info. Is that a continue button field?
Nope, it is a code block that asks 3 questions right now. Triggers 3 questions.
And it's going to be triggering the sign method.
Their name.
It doesn't seem like this is part of the signature flow, but okay. their name.
The court, the information, their information for the court, if the user wants to give it, it's optional.
And then
And
the sign.
their send method, right? Their method for, I mean, their sign method, their method for signing. Yep.
And does this need to be defined for anything? I feel like this is a nice convenience that you built into your specific interview.
That's that is the standard interface, right? That is like the simplest interface if you want to get all this stuff, right? Instead of making your own, if you want to customize, you can make your own thing that asks for the co-defendants, that does your own loop, whatever your own loop is, you can break it out yourself. But if you're just not customizing, then this is what's built in.
Okay, I'd recommend getting rid of this abstraction. I think it's part of the signature flow. I think it made a lot of sense for the interviews that you were working on, but I don't think the signature flow should dictate how you get this information.
Well, the sign method uses their name, so
it needs to have those things gathered. But
it needs to have the name
provide a
gathered.
way or order for it to be gathered in.
The sign method, the question that asks the signature method, uses their name, so it will trigger it one way or another.
But would that come from the cosigner variable where you already collected them?
Yeah, I would think so. That's how I would do it. I think that would be a lot easier for someone to see what's going on and be more likely to work on multiple interviews. So we've already built a list of all the people who are signing.
But we haven't. That's what I'm saying. This builds the list of the people who are signing.
I think it was really helpful way to do it in your specific interview, but I don't think it'd be helpful for that to be provided by this package for other interviews.
But you can't, but the lists are empty. Like you have a list of witnesses. Okay, so this is the way Caroline said was. It
makes sense for a specific interview. It does not make sense to us to provide that behavior at the signature flow level.
I think at step 2B,
then it doesn't make sense for us to provide
where you have, you say define this variable, a list. In that list, where I think that would be where you collect the name, collect court or whatever, right?
And the signing method, because you don't say who are the lists of all your co-defendants. Now, how is each one going to sign? You say who's a co-defendant and how are they going to sign? Who's the next co-defendant and how are they going to sign? So like, if you want to change that flow, then we can, but like.
No, I don't think that's the flow it's helpful for us to provide for the person. I think however they want to get the names, the people who are signing, they're not focused on signatures as their main point of their interview. It's probably a lot of complex information that they want to obtain and prompts they want to give.
Okay.
When you're talking about other people who are involved in your case. For us to try to provide that in the signature flow, I don't think makes sense.
Okay.
For every interview. It might have made a lot of sense for the one you're working on, but I don't think it makes sense as a general benefit.
Okay.
So this requires them to have a name before you send it out. So, but really all you have to interact with to get that to happen is the sign method.
Okay.
And also, I'm thinking for the sign method, would it make sense to include willing to sign or not? That way, you don't have to go through this customize. You have it right there already.
Well, but then you're not getting the actual person's the are you willing to sign is only for when you send away for the signature method. You don't ask that if the person isn't sending a link to the co-signer or the signer or whatever. So that is, if the person is signing on the device with the user, you don't say, "Are you willing to sign?" You just ask for their signature. if the person is emailing them a link, then the person who gets the link has to go through a screen that says, are you willing to sign?
No, I'm saying where you are saying, okay, use phone or email or sign on paper. Is that only apply to the user 0, or does it apply to each signer?
It applies to each signer, but I thought I
That's where
understood that the
I'm
user.
thinking, can you add an option, say, I don't want to sign?
So that's, from my understanding, a user, a signer has to themselves, if they're going to sign like independently, has to say, I am willing to sign this document. That's what my understanding was. Is that incorrect? Like the user can't answer for them and be like, yes, they are willing to sign this.
Yeah, but you are not asking the user. Are you asking the user to answer?
Yeah.
Another person will sign by phone or email.
Yes.
Okay.
The reason, Lily, is because we have to figure out how we're going to send it to them. So they could, after they get it by email, they could say, okay, I'm going to use my phone to sign it now, because they could be on their phone when they open the email. But
I see.
yeah, this would really just say SMS, I guess, instead of phone. Okay, so yeah, I don't think this is helpful for very many interviews. I think people were going to want to do that a different way most of the time.
Okay.
Though I totally makes sense that you went through and you figured out what are the things you need to do to sign it. So I don't know if we could add that in here. We need, really all you need is their name, right?
Right. Or let it trigger. I mean, you can let it just trigger the gathering of the names.
It needs to be
I
defined.
suppose.
But yeah, you're right.
I mean, like you don't have to define the names of all your users separately. You can let it happen in the flow of gathering the signatures so that you're asking signature methods.
All right. I wonder if this makes sense, although I can see some reasons for the flexibility of making it so it's from one person's perspective, because you're saying maybe you have the co-party who triggers something, like they're in the same room. But I suspect this could just be called something like gather signatures. I find the name sign on device to be confusing, but I wonder if it's an attribute at all.
The thing is that sign on device, I agree. I don't like how the name is interacting with this, but sign on device here in this case triggers the user signing on the device, and then and then also triggers, but in other cases, sign on device will just be one person signing on the device. So there needs to be an intermediate step. If we want to make the language more clear, we have to make an intermediate step.
Well, I mean, what if it was just called gather signatures or something like that? I don't know if that's the right name, but
because
what I find confusing is
it offers them the device choice.
Doesn't make sense right now.
We can say signature device choice, but it also then gets their signatures. So that doesn't like,
oh, okay. Well, see,
describe that part.
I didn't understand this. Actually, it's really actually two things. Which device is the user signing on, as well as getting all the cosigner signatures. You're right, those should be separate. I don't think those should be combined. So now I understand the naming for that more. Mm-hmm. So it's sign on device, but this is sign method. So why would this not just be sign method?
Yeah.
Because it's not the, let me think about that. I mean, it's a thing where you pick between your current device and a mobile device. You can either sign on your current device or your mobile device. You're not like, later I will sign on my device or my, like, I'm not sure how I would ask a different question for that.
I suspect you might find that you want a lot of these same options ultimately. Not signing for the person, obviously, but they might text or email to themselves. They might sign on paper after printed out. or they might just say, I don't want to sign it.
Okay.
Maybe they're just not ready, but that's kind of, these are the same really. Sign a paper after print it out, don't get a signature, because we can't enforce them getting a signature. But they might say, okay, I'm getting this document ready, but I'm not going to sign it at all. This is a placeholder in case maybe it's part of my safety plan, like the 209A, for example. So I think it's going to be all the same options, except for this proxy signing option. So that kind of feels like it's just a slightly different list of choices.
Okay, we have to think about what that looks like if they want to change their method of signature, but sure, yeah. I think that can work.
Okay, and then I think we need something. So I actually was thinking if this is about reflecting who the person requesting signatures is, it could make sense to have it be something like user 0 dot trigger all signatures or something, or signature flow. But it might just make as much sense for it just to be called a top level thing like AL multi-user signature flow. Because it's not really in relation to the user in most interviews. Like that's kind of presumed. So it might be clearer if we didn't make it an attribute of an object.
Okay.
And then this X here is, again, I think maybe it doesn't need in relation to a user. It might just be the top level variable the same way. So just a couple of things I'm noticing, but otherwise, I think we're really just talking about all signers and then getting all the things you need, the signing method. So it's like 3 things kind of that we want to define or trigger. Okay, I'm going to go much later than I intended to, but I thought this was helpful.
Yeah, I think so too.
Lily, do you want to stay on with Michelle, or do we just pick this up later? Maybe after you've looked at these thoughts, Michelle, you'll have more questions. We can follow up with them during the week too.
I can come back next week.
Okay. Yeah, if we could get this recording, I know we're not always super religious about getting these recordings online, but if I could get at least a copy of this recording so that I can have it for reference when I'm going back through this.
Yep, definitely. Okay. I mean, I think this is the part where you really need to bounce it off another person to get feedback. And there's no way I could have come up with these things until seeing something. And yeah, this is good work. But I think we can make it a little bit. Maybe this will address. I know you had a more specific question, but hopefully this gives you some framework for that more specific question too, which I don't even have track of right now. But.
Sure, I'm not sure it does that, but maybe we'll see.
All right. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later. Talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.